Great. Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome to yet another episode of My Science Journey, where we have bi-weekly webinars and we feature amazing scientists of African descent who are working both on the continent and in the diaspora to advance scientific work in Africa. And in today's session, I'm very excited to host Dr. Joseph Tatuene. And he is a neurologist and a neuroscientist, and he will tell us more about that. And his expertise is mainly in neuroepidemiology, stroke research, and translational science. Exciting stuff. And he's currently a Wellcome Trust Early Career Fellow at the University of Oxford's Wolfson Center for Prevention of Stroke and Dementia, working on a very, very exciting study, the Oxford-Cameroon Atherosclerosis and Stroke Study, which I'm very, very excited to hear about. So thank you everyone for joining us. And if you have any question along the way for our guest, make sure to put them in the live chat where I'll be able to read them out and our guest will answer them. But before I say too much, this is not about me. Welcome, Joseph. How are you
Thank
today?
you. Thank you. Good afternoon, Anita. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's my pleasure to be here, and I'm very well.
Great. It is very, 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 very good to have you. And before we get into the science, deep into the science stuff, I'd like to start with something light. So, if you are comfortable sharing, what
Yeah.
is something that people would be very surprised to learn about you, especially something that is not in your CV?
Mhm. So that's a trap for me. Yeah. Okay, so I would say two things potentially. The
Mhm.
first is that French is my first language. It's my
Oh.
mother tongue, so I am potentially more comfortable talking in
Mhm.
French than in English, although
Mhm.
I've virtually never published any scientific paper in French. I mean,
Mhm.
a research paper. And the second thing is that, as probably most Africans and most people on earth, I like music. So,
Mhm.
and sometimes I do sing.
Oh, wow. Maybe at the end
Sometimes,
you'll give us
but
like a teaser, 2 minutes. But oh, great. I'm actually learning French, so I will
yeah.
try not to embarrass myself with what I know so far. But I'm in the process of getting there.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I have huge respect for people who are able to work and lead a career in a language, in a second language, especially like a scientific career in their second language. So hats off to you. Yeah.
Thank you.
And hopefully you'll give us a 2 minute teaser at the end. So
Uh,
anyone who stays until the end, maybe you'll get to hear Joseph sing for us. Okay, so let's get into it. So as I mentioned in the intro, you're a neurologist and a neuroscientist. But before you became that, where did what was your first inspiration to go into a career in science?
career in science, I think it probably came somewhere around end of secondary school, I think, when I was preparing for the first school um, medical entrance examination,
Mm-hmm.
first medical entrance examination. I mean, if you talk about career in science as a researcher, because
Mm-hmm.
obviously in the French education system or kind of francophone educational system, you have two parts to your secondary school, and usually in the second part from form um, 4 or 5, you start specializing in either more literature like topics, history, languages, or in more science topics like mathematics, physics, chemistry, or biology. So I took the science path,
Mm-hmm.
but uh, I started really thinking about becoming a researcher that is creating new knowledge
Mm-hmm.
or um, investigating complex problems when I finished my secondary school and was preparing to get into med school.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I remember I read a story about a researcher. I can't remember his name anymore, but he was using radio tracers to kind of investigate the production of insulin in the pancreas in humans.
Mhm.
So, and then I thought, oh, this is something very, very cool. Maybe I should be doing the same. Yeah.
Mhm.
So, and I talked about that at the during the interview because
Yeah.
at the time, the medical entrance exam was in two parts,
Mhm.
contrary to how it's conducted now. So you had the first written part, and then after that, the pre-selection, you
Mm.
went to the interview. So I discussed that with my interviewers, and I don't know, maybe it helped getting me into the school.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. For sure. Seeing as here you are now.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. So when you got into medical school, did you always know that you'd specialize in neuroscience and neurology?
Yeah, I think so because my interest in the nervous system really came very early in
Mm-hmm.
my studies. Like for medicine, it was very since the young age, but not because I knew anything about medicine. I think probably around the age of 6,
Mm-hmm.
I our teacher in class just um did a survey and asked everyone, "What do you want to be in when you grow up?" And I just wrote on the paper, "I want to be a doctor." At that time, I didn't know that you could be a doctor without being a physician.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the reason why I wrote that is, I mean, I am thinking in retrospect because at that time I didn't make any connection, but because I used to go to the hospital with my mom and I would see how the physicians and the nurses take care of patients, and I it's really that uh, closeness to people who are suffering and taking care of people that I
Yeah.
think initially inspired me. And then when I reached secondary school, I think in Form 5, I started um, when I was studying the nervous system, because in our secondary school we studied the nervous system in Form 5, and we also studied in the last year before we write the GCE A level.
Mm-hmm.
So, but in Form 5, when I was studying the nervous system, I noticed that it's a very interesting part of the body. Everything is well organized, and if you understand that organization, you can predict what would happen without the need of reading uh, additional books, or because everything is very well structured. So
Yeah.
that was uh, where my interest came about the nervous system, and from there on, I kept a special focus on that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So, so we've reached the point where you're in medical school.
Yeah.
Where did you do your medical school?
So in Cameroon, I
In
had the
Cameroon.
Faculty of Medicine and Biomedical Sciences,
Mm-hmm.
University of Yaoundé one. So that was the only faculty of medicine at the time in
Mm-hmm.
my country.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. So talk us through after med school.
Yeah.
How did you transition now into your career, like your first few years?
Yeah. So I need to condense 15 years in 1 minute. So after that, as I said, my interest was to do neurology.
Mm,
And when I graduated from med school, there was the training for neurology, specialization in neurology was not yet available in my country, in Cameroon. So I
mm,
had to look abroad, and to go abroad because I come from a very kind of modest background or
yeah,
socioeconomic background.
yeah.
I had to find a way to fund my studies abroad. My parents couldn't do that, so I had to find a scholarship,
Mm,
and there was one that provided by the Swiss government, which is called the Swiss Government Excellence Scholarship,
mm,
uh, which is in partnership with the government of Cameroon. So I applied for that and got selected. So that's how I ended up doing neurology in Switzerland,
mm,
the University of Geneva. and finishing the neurology training, the idea was to go back to Cameroon to kind of give back and use that knowledge to treat patients. But I was concerned about um, the availability of uh, advanced treatment possibilities or a treatment device, diagnosis device, medication. So the application or the transferability of the knowledge, I would say,
Mm,
was a challenge. That was the first thing. But also, as I said, I was interested in doing research,
mhm,
and especially in stroke and cerebrovascular diseases, and I understood that I have trained in neurology in a context where infectious diseases have almost disappeared, or
mm,
it only remains a few viral infections for which it's not really worth looking for any sophisticated treatment. But going back to Cameroon, the cerebrovascular disease will be constantly happening in the midst of various infectious diseases, bacterial, parasitic, and I had to find a way to combine both, like study cerebrovascular disease in a context where infectious disease are still very prevalent. So
mm,
I said I need more training on how to uh, combine the two knowledge or uh, capacities in terms of research. So I went to the University of Liverpool. I contacted Professor Tom Solomon, who at the time was the director of the Institute of Infection and Global Health, and was working with one of his fellows, Dr. Laura Benjamin, on HIV-related stroke, and they had published a couple of papers on that. And
mm,
I said, okay, that's probably the ideal team to kind of look into this interaction between infectious diseases and cerebrovascular diseases. So I went there for my master's. I did a master of research. That's where I started doing translational research, and
mm,
then a fellowship 1 year in Malawi at the Malawi Liverpool Wellcome Trust Clinical Research Program to apply what I had just learned and produce some initial research papers.
mhm,
And then after that, I mean, I was trained. I could say I was fully trained at that time.
mm,
But then I said, okay, I need to go back to Cameroon. But to go back to Cameroon and be able to do clinical work as well as research, I need funding because on our continent, government funded research is really scarce,
mm,
and the amount of funding that you need to do this type of complex research is huge, I would say. So
mhm,
I knew that I would be competing at the international level with other uh, excellent scientists from around the world,
mm,
and the type of funding or the funders that would be able to invest those large amounts of money into research in Africa. I mean, there are not many of them.
mm,
You have the Wellcome Trust, you have the NIH, you have the MRC, maybe NIHR, and but all the others are usually focused on their country or a specific continent. And at that time, also, the Wellcome Trust was kind of changing their funding policy because up to that time they had been supporting masters and research student and PhD students, sorry, so mostly research at the graduate level. And at that time they switched to only funding what they call referred to as discovery research. That means funding people at the postgraduate level, that is early career researchers or mid-career up to the independent senior investigators. So I said, okay, yes, I need to compete for that funding it's changing, and now PhD is a requirement. So I need to get a PhD before I go back. So that's how I went into my PhD in neuroscience at the University of Alberta. And
Mm-hmm.
after that, I then came back and luckily was able to apply and secure funding from the Wellcome to start this journey back to Cameroon. So that's
Wow.
it.
It's interesting how your journey starts and ends with Cameroon. So Cameroon is really at your heart, like giving back and going back home and making sure that all the knowledge that you're gathering, you're using it to do work that will help improve lives back
Yeah,
home on their motherland.
exactly.
Yeah. And so you've trained and you've worked in many countries, started in Cameroon, moved to Switzerland, then the UK, then Alberta. I believe Alberta is in the US, right?
Is in Canada.
Oh, in Canada,
It's one
sorry.
of yeah, one of the
Yeah.
Canadian provinces.
And now you're back to working in the UK through the University of Oxford, but
Yes.
you're working on a study that is going to be implemented in Cameroon. So how has all these different experiences, how have they shaped your perspective on research in both in an African context, but also in a diasporan context, and how that differs?
I think, I mean, mostly when you are at the graduate level,
Hmm.
to put it simply, you do the research that, I mean, you are interested in, but that other people also want you to do. So,
Hmm.
um, I have tried to look to find teams that do things that of interest to me, and that I from whom I can learn new techniques, new approaches that would be useful
Hmm.
when I go back to the African continent. I mean, it's Cameroon, but the goal is really to contribute more widely to the research on Africa in Africa. And I think the most important lessons or takeaways from this journey across the globe is that it gives you the it it helps you build kind of some ability to adjust and overcome challenges. So, compared to someone who has always done things in a specific location,
Hmm.
you know that you need to always find solutions.
Yeah.
That challenge is kind of the constant,
Mm.
and you need to constantly adjust, think of new innovative ways of approaching a problem. So it gives you that flexibility in your mind.
Hmm.
It also gives you a different perspective on each problem. You know that this is a problem, but there is not a single solution. You
Yeah.
know, just by living in different countries, you see that people have adopted different approaches to solve the same problems. Just look at the sockets, you know. Sockets are different in the US, in Canada, in France, in Italy, in Switzerland,
Hmm.
but it's just to solve a single problem of how to bring electricity to make a device
Hmm.
work, you know. And you understand that if you go back to Africa, you have to treat or manage patients with acute stroke or Parkinson's disease.
Hmm.
Yes, there are solutions that have been given to this problem on other continents, in other countries, but you can still find different ways of
Mm.
solving that problem in the African context. So it gives you this um, way of thinking, which is good for a researcher because sometimes people are stuck with the one approach and they don't know how to change their mind or to change their views
Mm.
when they are in front of a problem. And the third thing is, I think it gives me a diversity of techniques because in the different places where I've been, I've learned different things.
Mm,
So at some places it was more computing statistics, at others it was laboratory medicine, and at others it was, so I have a different set of skills that I can use to address problems. And also I have a different set of collaborators or people that I can contact to ask for advice or support or even collaborations. So I'm going back kind of on my own,
mhm,
alone, but I have support all around the globe,
mm,
which makes a big difference compared maybe with someone who would have trained in Cameroon, stayed in Cameroon, and reached the same level as me because they are really on their own. Of course, they have their support locally, but I will have the same plus the international support. So
yeah,
yeah.
most definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, and it is important. I think I advise every researcher in Cameroon to at least spend 6 months or a year, if
Mm,
possible, if they don't want to do a graduate degree outside of Cameroon or outside of Africa to
mm,
build these connections and get a different perspective.
for sure. So in your response, you mentioned that one of the things that this experience has given you is the ability to adjust to challenges.
Yes.
And I would like to challenge you to share with us maybe one or several key challenges you faced in your journey and how you navigated them.
Yeah, I mean,
Mhm.
in a 15-year journey, there are certainly so many challenges.
Mhm.
And the most obvious ones are the language
Mm,
barrier. You come from a French-speaking country. You have studied in French, obviously French and English, because Cameroon is bilingual. We have both. So in the Faculty of Medicine, we had at the time at least 30-40% of our lectures delivered in English. But
mhm,
if you haven't been working with that um, language every time or using it days in and out,
mm,
you need to quickly adjust and be able to walk to reach the working capacity in that language. So that was the first challenge. And I think it was quite easy for me initially when I arrived in Geneva. I took a 3 month uh, course just to prepare for the IELTS because I had to take the IELTS the first time
mhm,
before moving to the UK. And
mhm,
then when I did that, I realized that in Cameroon, they had already taught me almost everything,
mhm.
and from that point on, I never went into a English classroom again because I thought uh, the English here is the same in Cameroon and you
Yes.
don't need any more lectures. The second challenge I would say is almost obviously the financial
Mm,
challenge and because you depend on the scholarship and once you have finished your studies the scholarship ends and you need to find ways to bridge to sources of funding or to scholarships so and you have to quickly develop the ability to think ahead of time. That is, if you have a 1 year scholarship, from the
mm,
moment you start your studies, you should already be thinking about where you are going next and
mhm.
develop the ability to look for funding opportunities and also to apply for them. So,
Yeah.
and I have been lucky in the past decade that I've always been able to secure funding for my studies or my research. So, but that's one of the the biggest challenge when you study abroad and you are not from a wealthy
Mhm.
family. And lastly, I would say there is this when you come from Africa specifically, there is this need to constantly uh, prove that you are or you were well trained when
Mm,
it comes to medicine or to research. As soon as you say you come from Africa, there is a bias that people think, okay, the training or either in clinical medicine or in research was low standard. And
Mm,
you have to constantly fight and demonstrate that I can do things as well as you, if not better.
mm,
Yeah. But if you just concentrate and do what you have to do, people come to realize that
mhm,
the
mhm.
theory thoughts was not correct.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I think you've touched on very important aspects, especially when as Africans we come into these spaces. One on the intimidation of language. Like
Yeah.
before you do that IELTS test, and after doing it and realizing that actually you had
Yeah.
enough to to do what you're supposed to do with the language, and then also on the training and feeling the need to prove yourself
Yeah.
when you come into this spaces. Like, I'm actually a doctor, medical doctor trained,
Yeah.
and I can also practice. Yeah, yeah. Because I've had such conversations as well among my friends who are physicians
Yeah.
coming into the diaspora. So, um, let's talk a bit about mentorship because
Yeah.
mentorship is very important to what we do at My Science Journey.
Mm.
And you mentioned a bit about the professor at Liverpool who you joined his research,
Yes.
but maybe just on specifically on mentorship, if you could tell us about some of your mentors and how they have shaped your career path or your approach to mentorship now.
Yeah. So
Mhm.
15 years again. So many
Yeah.
mentors. And
Mhm.
when it comes to to pointing some specific people, I'm always afraid because you always forget
Forget
some
someone.
people. Yeah. And there are also so many of them that walk in the shadow, that there are
Mhm.
people who do things for you without you knowing. And
True.
you can never name those people, but
Mm,
sometimes they change your career. So, and most of my mentors have been also my supervisors.
mhm,
Like my first supervisor when I was doing my medical degree in Cameroon, my
mhm,
MD supervisor, the Professor Joseph Camnio, who kind of was the first to lead me into this practical field of epidemiology and studying
mhm,
populations and going to collect data in people where they live, on people where they live, not just at the hospital.
mhm,
And then I had these my mentors in Geneva who gave me the opportunity to study neurology, stroke neurology, and who kept supporting me afterwards. The head of neurology, Professor uh, Pierre Pollack, Andreas Kleinschmidt now, Gilles Alali, who is now director of the Lena Center for Memory in Lausanne.
mhm,
Then in Liverpool, Professor Tom Solomon with Laura Benjamin at the Malawi Liverpool Wellcome Center, Henry
mhm.
Mwanduba, who is currently the director. So they also
Yeah.
supported me very well in Canada. Glenn Kling, my PhD supervisor, and now Professor Peter Rothwell, who really worked with me during several weeks or months to craft
Mm,
this new project that helped us secure the funding from Wellcome. So there are many of them, and I cannot cite them all. And even in Cameroon, like the first people who gave me recommendation letters and who trained me, I would say, in neurology, neurosurgery, Professor Njamshi, Professor
mhm,
uh, Jenche, who are now kind of professors, but the first people who gave me the opportunity. So in it, for all of these people that I have named and maybe others that I've forgotten, uh, the first thing that they would do is listen to what you want to achieve and then helping you to get there. They wouldn't start by saying, okay, do this, do that, but they would say, okay, what do you want to do? Where do you want to go? And then how can we support you? So you are really the person saying what in that interaction or relationship, and
mm,
they are just there to say, okay, if it's a letter that I need to write, I will write it. If I need to talk to someone, I will do it. If I need to help you write a grant application or write a project or write an article, make it better, I will do it. So, but you really tell them this is what I want to do. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that. I think as mentees, we often forget that the relationship between a mentor and a mentee is primarily mentee driven. So it's
mm,
up to you to put in more of the work than what the mentor needs to put in. And then they offer their
exactly.
guidance in that.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's now talk about the big project that you mentioned. So you're currently working on establishing the Oxford-Cameroon atherosclerosis and stroke study. So, briefly just tell us what it's about, what inspired it, how did it start? Yeah, let's start from there.
Yeah. So, how did it start? It was mainly the goal of going back to Cameroon to do research on
Mm,
stroke that initiated everything. So I had to find a place where I could have the mentorship that I needed
mm-hmm,
uh, in terms of expertise in stroke research, in population stroke research, and there's no better place. I mean, yeah, probably other places, but there's no better place than Oxford with the Oxford Vascular Study, which is kind of a reference in the world of stroke in terms of how to study stroke risk factors, stroke outcomes in a population and also I needed to apply for funding. And as I said, one of the major funders of made biomedical research in Africa, ambitious biomedical research is the Wellcome Trust.
mm-hmm,
So the Wellcome Trust is a UK charity,
mm-hmm,
and I realized that okay, I need to be closer to them, to their environment, to how they think, to be able to do uh, this application.
mm,
So those were the two things. So I came to Oxford and started applying. And also the third thing is uh, I wanted to study or to convince them that it is important to conduct studies on stroke in Africa because stroke in black or in blacks or in black Africans is not the same as stroke in the Western world. And to do that, uh, because I didn't have any good quality data from Black people living on the African continent. I had to start by looking at what is already available on Blacks living in the UK. And
mm,
the UK, I mean, another reason for being here, apart from being uh, at Oxford, being close to the Wellcome, is the fact that UK is one of the only countries in Europe where you have this possibility of looking at race when you talk about medicine or
mm,
medical research, because in all of the countries, usually it's, or in some, or in most of them, it's not even allowed to mention the race or the origin of someone
mm,
uh, in their medical records, at least in a way that could be used for research. So that was an advantage. So when we say Oxford Cameroon, it's really that it's a project that starts in Oxford and then transitions to Cameroon. It will probably continue in Cameroon, but keep the collaboration to share expertise, knowledge, and allow capacity building. So the project aims at first refining the epidemiology of stroke in ethnic minorities
mm-hmm,
using data that are already available in the UK healthcare system.
mm-hmm,
So that's the initial part of the project. So to give us some insight into what potential differences we should expect to find or we should be focusing on going forward. One of the differences that we found and that I recently presented at the European Stroke Organization conference is that there is a difference in the risk of atrial fibrillation in blacks versus whites, that blacks and Asians have 3 to 4 times less risk of atrial fibrillation than whites or white British, I would say. So we need to understand why it is the case. And we think that it is not just related to bias in access to healthcare or in diagnostic capabilities, but it has something more biological, but that we will need to demonstrate it. And to demonstrate it, we need to collect more data,
Mm-hmm.
not only in the UK, but also in blacks living on the African continent. So the second part of the project will be conducted in Africa, collecting novel data on stroke risk factors, and trying to understand this difference in the risk of atrial fibrillation, but also other aspects of cerebrovascular diseases.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So what from what you've mentioned about the objectives of the study, what would you say is currently missing in global research, especially global stroke research?
I think everything is missing. Yeah, because I think the basic epidemiology even of stroke is
Mm,
not well described. That
mm-hmm,
is, there are data, there are studies, there are fantastic studies like the Siren led by Mayowa Wolabi, Fred Safo, Rufus Akinyemi, and
mm-hmm,
Bruce Obia Gele in the US. But that's more or less one study on the whole continent. And the continent is big, and there are differences across regions: Central Africa, West Africa, Southern Africa. So we need to have, similar to what is done in the US or in Europe, big studies, big cohorts that we study in detail and follow up over years to really understand what shapes the epidemiology of stroke, the risk of stroke, and how we could adjust treatment guidelines to meet the specific needs of our populations. For example, if you ask researchers what is the relative proportion of ischemic or hemorrhagic stroke in Africa, you
mm,
will get different answers. While in Europe, it's kind of clear cut. They know it's 85-15% or around those numbers
mm,
with a majority of ischemic strokes. But is that the case in Africa? Nobody's sure about the answer. So we need to start with the basics, defining the basic epidemiology very well,
mm,
and then we would be able to study mechanisms more in details, because we don't even know, we don't know everything, or almost, we know almost nothing about the contribution of infectious diseases to the risk of stroke. We know that within the 2 weeks after an acute infection, the risk of stroke is higher. But how does that happen?
mm,
And is it higher with some infectious organisms than others? Nobody knows. And we need to understand that. We need to understand if parasitic diseases, for example, have any contribution to
mm,
the risk of stroke. And so there are so many things to study. And also, when you look at international clinical trials, uh, usually Africans are not included. But it's not, I mean, sometimes we want to think that it is discrimination, but I don't think that it's always discrimination. It's because we don't have baseline data,
mm,
baseline information, baseline stroke care services. So if, for example, you have a trial of thrombolysis, how do you implement that in a place where there is no stroke unit, for example?
mm,
Uh, so we need to start building those basic structures and that basic knowledge about stroke, which is missing.
yeah.
And then we will be able to contribute to more ambitious initiatives. For example, genetics of stroke. We don't really understand the genetic of stroke in Black Africans. but we want to think that it's the same as the genetics of stroke in Europe, but
Mm.
most likely not, because although we share the same kind of genome, genetic background, there are a lot of variations that happen through the centuries that we have been
Mm-hmm.
on Earth, and we need to understand that.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. So at this time, I'd like to turn to the audience. So we are
Yes.
in the second half of like the second half of our conversation. So I would like to take some questions from the audience. So if anyone has a question, keep them coming in. The first one is, can you emphasize on the importance of collaboration, especially on the kind of research that you're doing?
I mean, collaboration, nobody can do research today without any collaboration.
Mm.
Collaboration is really the driver of what the Wellcome Trust calls the discovery research, because uh, science has become so complex, especially medical research,
Mm-hmm.
that you cannot master everything.
Mm.
And if you really want to investigate or to answer a question or to solve a problem in a comprehensive way, you need to talk to other people. I
Mm.
mean, when we say collaboration, people always think that you need to build a big team and have meetings every time and then share authorship on papers. No, collaboration starts with talking to people. Like when you go to a conference, you can meet people who are interested in the same topic. You discuss, you share your idea and say, I have this problem that I want to solve. What do you think about it? And progressively, if they have a solution that they can bring to the table, or they have an advice, or they have time to keep kind of giving you guidance, there starts the collaboration, before you start writing big grand applications together and sharing the budget. No, it starts with discussing with people, getting their opinion, getting their advice on how to do it better. And so it's key. It's key, and everyone needs to be
Yeah.
open to
Mm.
that. And
Mm-hmm.
currently, as I go back, I always look around and see who is in Africa that is doing something similar, with whom I could keep the conversation going until we are able maybe to do things in Cameroon and in Nigeria, or in Cameroon and in Ghana, in Cameroon and in South Africa or Malawi, so that we are also able to build this large multinational networks to deliver high quality research.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Collaboration starts with a conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And another question is, how did you secure the fellowship? So I'm guessing this is the Wellcome Trust Early Career Fellowship that you're on.
Yeah, so it's the process is straightforward. I want to say it's not
Mm.
an easy process. It's a long
Yeah.
process, but it's straightforward. You have an idea uh to do research on stroke in Cameroon. You think about you read the funders eligibility criteria, check that you meet those criteria,
Mm-hmm.
and then what they expect from you in your application, and you
Mm-hmm.
start addressing. But the first thing you need to look at is, am I eligible?
Mm-hmm.
Or if I'm not, what shall I do to be eligible? As I told you, when I started thinking about this a few years ago, I noticed that they were changing their funding policy to fund only PhD holders and beyond. So I had to go and find my PhD before I come back, So, and it took me 3 or 4 years to get there. And then I had my project. I read the specifications. It has to be discovery research. It has to be something ambitious, but
Mm-hmm.
also you need to make it uh, feasible, so that when they look at it, they don't think that you have decided to go live on Uranus or Mars, and it's not possible, That is really something achievable if they support you.
Mm,
Then you write your project, your proposal. Usually we are told you start writing one pager. There's the one pager.
mm-hmm,
What is my aim? What is background of that I'm building on? What is the gap in knowledge? What is the gap in research?
mm-hmm,
And then how do I plan to do that? And if I succeed, what would be the outcome? What will I gain? What will the community gain? The research and the populations. So you put that on one page
mm-hmm.
and you start talking to people that what do you think of this? Do you think it's feasible? Am I too ambitious? What would you do? What would you not do? And
Mm,
they give you their ideas. It's not a one person business. It's
yeah.
usually a team. People tell you, no, tweak it this way, tweak it that way. It will be more appealing. It will sound more ambitious, or this is more likely to bring new knowledge, new discoveries. That is what your funder wants. And you start writing, expanding. So from one page, you go to 5 pages, then to 10 pages. But usually the project is 5, 6 pages in that Wellcome early career. So it's not that long.
Mm,
There's a word limit also. So you start expanding. And once the project is there, you feel the other aspects because there's also uh, other aspects about regulations, the ethics, how you plan to grow your research team, how you plan to acquire the equipment, the
mm,
budget, who will fund what, and you find collaborators because another thing, and they insist on that in the application that they want to see new collaborations being formed, and they want you to explain how this collaboration will be maintained forward
mm-hmm,
because
mm-hmm,
they don't want you to succeed only in 5 years. They want you to succeed for the whole of your career. So they need to make sure that you have thought about the sustainability of your project and your career. So those are the things that you think about, and you cannot do it alone.
yeah.
Once again, you have
Mm-hmm.
to talk to people and get their advice and support.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Speaking of sustainability and the
Mm.
future, what would you say is your vision
Yeah.
long term for an Africa-led stroke research system and care system? And what do you think will take for us to get there?
Many years of work, of
Mhm,
investment, and I do suspect that I will be long gone by the time it happens or it fully materializes.
mhm,
It's really, we need to, right from the start, integrate care with research.
mm,
Because with the idea that we need to be constantly improving systems, improving ourselves, improving the way we approach diseases, improving the way we treat people,
mm,
improving the way we prevent diseases, not only at the individual level, but also at the population level. So we need strong uh, networks for the management of stroke. We need to start at the population level, prevent stroke from happening. Because
mm,
when we think about stroke care, the first thing we think of is we need to build a stroke unit. But if there are no strokes, then stroke unit is not necessary.
mm,
So we need to start at the population level, educate people about stroke, encourage them to live healthy lifestyles, inform them about how to identify stroke before we receive the unlucky ones at the stroke unit and manage the stroke, treat them. And also, when they get out of the stroke unit, we need to make sure that they go back to the society. They are reintegrated in the society. And unfortunately, currently in Africa, at least in my country, this path from the hospital to the community is kind of not really structured because there are a lot of things. It's not only the rehabilitation, but also the legislation. How does someone who had a stroke, and let's say he was a taxi driver, he had a stroke, he's no longer able to drive his taxi safely.
Mm-hmm.
What is there for him? What is left? How do you reorient him to another uh, job, for example? How do you make sure that he can still look after his family? I mean, financially speaking, for example,
Yeah.
and the regulations or the steps on how to achieve that are not clear enough. So we should aim to build a comprehensive stroke prevention and care system. Stroke prevention, acute stroke care, rehabilitation, and reintegration in the society for the long term. And it's not only a matter of policies and clinical care. This should go along with research. That is, at every single step in this process, we should have a strong research. We should have strong research teams that uh, help adjust the policies to the needs of the country or of the population and to the context also, because we cannot just take what is done in Europe or in the US. I mean, these countries have been around for centuries. Of course, we have also been around for centuries, but
Mhm.
I mean, at this level of stroke care for many years, and we have not even started. So we also need to bear in mind that our own local research should inform the way we build our systems.
Mm, yeah. And what would you say then gives you hope? In all this work that we need to do, what do you say? What would you say gives you hope right now when you think about this future?
Yeah, I think the first reason to be hopeful is that we are here talking about science, and it was not possible
Mm,
or not common 10 years ago or 15
mm,
years ago when I left Cameroon. So that is a reason for
mm-hmm.
to be hopeful. There are people listening to us, asking questions, being interested. The
Mm,
second thing is that more and more people become aware of the importance of being well trained. I see so many young people applying for scholarships to go and train abroad, UK, US, Canada, Europe, and because they understand that knowledge is power, and you cannot really change things if you don't have the appropriate knowledge and skills. And I do hope that these people who train will have the opportunity or the courage to come back and help build a better society. And the third thing is recently the African Stroke Organization was
mm-hmm.
created. Fantastic work by our Nigerian and Ghanaian colleagues that I mentioned earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And this means that there's really uh, a will to change or make things better. And that's also a source of hope. And finally, I would say uh, funders are increasingly interested in
Mm,
funding research on non-communicable disease. Wellcome Trust, for example, is now funding uh, more NCDs, mental health. So I think we just need to take that opportunity, take advantage that they are there willing to fund. There's also the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation that is doing more and more
mm.
in terms of funding research. So if we are well trained, we just need to go and get that money to do what we want to do.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. I'm surprised that the time has really gone. It's almost at the top of the hour. So let me check for any more questions as we close. And so if you could go back
Yeah.
in time and give younger Joseph one piece of advice, what would it be?
Yeah, that's a tough question because always you have the impression that every single thing you have done or
Hmm.
lived or experienced has made you into what
Mm-hmm.
you are now. But I think potentially uh, start um, learning about, let's say, coding
Mm,
earlier because it helps you do so many things now that the world is digitized in every aspect,
mm-hmm.
and coding is taking a huge place because at the
Mm-hmm.
beginning we were doing statistical analysis with SPSS, with Excel, and then now everything is in coding. So if the younger generation wants to get ready, they
Yeah.
need to start learning how
Mm,
to code. R is free, but there are other software like Stata or that or SAS and many others. You have can find a list on Google, and they need to start how to learning to code. And the
mm-hmm.
second thing is getting more interested in genetics, genomics research. In the past, it didn't have it was or genetics was really about rare diseases or familial genetic diseases, but now it's everywhere. And if someone is looking into building a research career in the next 10, 20 years,
Mm,
they would have to understand genetics.
great.
Mm.
I think those are very valuable lessons that still apply to any young person starting out in their career right now.
Yeah,
Thank you for that. And thank you for offering us 1 hour of your very busy schedule. It has
thank
been
you.
really, really enlightening learning from you a lot. And I'm very excited to see what comes out of the OxCASS.
Yeah,
It's
it's a
that's the
challenging. It's
application.
even kind of s- frightening, or because the expectation is so high, and
Yes.
you have a small individual who is trying to kind of lift up the world. So I do
Mhm.
hope that I will deliver, I will meet Wellcome trust expectations and all
Yes.
your and others' expectations.
Yeah. At my science journey, we believe in you. So you have our backing.
Thank you.
Thank you so
It's
much.
good to
And
know.
thank you to our audience who joined us today and engaged with us in this conversation.
Mm.
Have a lovely rest of your day, and we will see you in 2 weeks for our next MSG webinar. And if you would like to reach out to Dr. Tatuene, I think they can reach out to you on LinkedIn, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
LinkedIn,
And that's your name
Twitter,
on
yeah,
LinkedIn. Yeah.
and my email address is on the university website, so you
Oh, yeah, yeah, the
can find
University
me.
of
Yeah.
Oxford website.
Yes.
Perfect. So if you have further questions that you'd like to ask our guest, then you can reach out to him on LinkedIn and on his email. Thank you so much and have a lovely
Thank you. My
day.
pleasure.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.